Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked, and thank you to more than 112,000 people engaging with Sport Unlocked content across the pod and the social channels to listen to. Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News.
Is that as accurate as 500 million ticket requests, Rob, for the World Cup?
I've just added it up from TikTok, YouTube, and all the pod listeners. I've not even checked some of the other platforms, but search out Sport Unlocked and all those. You can watch us, listen to us.
Every 9th human being in the world is now listening or watching Sport Unlocked. How amazing is that? Not
all
true.
For free as well.
All for free.
It might
all
well
for free.
Be hundreds of more million requests to listen as well.
There you go.
Well, if there's 6 billion people all going to be tuning in to watching the World Cup, so it will be claimed, then, that's, I think, a fair proportion listening to Sport Unlocked.
And we have now been going exactly 5 years.
Wow.
Many happy returns.
It was a long old time, and I could say our appearances have not changed in that time. Also might not be true.
But one thing to reflect on, not about ourselves, but the 5-year period. We started this pod to fill the gap of the lack of sports news, analysis on pods. If we reflect from 2021 to 2026, is the sports governance world how we might have imagined it to be 5 years on? Would we expect bigger changes?
No, it's as awful as I anticipated it was going to be honest. Football is one of the most, for me, one of the most poorly governed games in terms of power. It's concentrated at the top. These big football presidents are riding high in perhaps even stronger way than they were in 2021 when we started this. And also as strong, if not stronger, than when, say, Sepp Blatter was in charge of FIFA. What do we talk about? What's the word that is said on this pod more than any other?
Yeah,
FIFA.
So you say football is one of the worst governed sports. So which ones do you think are the best governed ones? We don't want to be totally negative.
I'm a huge fan of I will say this without actually joking. I was going to make a joke here, but I think the way track and field has the athletes' integrity unit should be a model for those that can afford it. The independence and the power to enforce your rules. Football has a lot of rules, a lot of governing bodies, but really doesn't like to enforce when it comes to powerful teams or powerful individuals.
Athletics has shown a willingness to upset people in the Sebco era to take on the difficult issues. Having had challenges getting elected, first of all, with some of those lingering Russia issues with doping, but certainly shown when they need to, they'll speak out.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think obviously football being the biggest sport in the world is going to have more focus. I think actually many of the criticisms that are directed at FIFA are equally issues for other major sports and international federations.
That is fair.
A disproportionate focus on FIFA because, as it likes to talk about itself, being the world's most popular sport, so therefore it will get more attention, more scrutiny. And that is a point you made. One thing that's changed in the last 5 years, the powerful in football have got more powerful.
Yeah, for sure. From whether you're looking at the top of the supreme body, FIFA, or when you filter down, you only have to listen to the back catalogue of this podcast, Sport Unlocked, to see how that manifested itself. And we've had some great terrible stories as a result of that over the years.
The big trend has been perhaps the shift towards Saudi Arabia even more. When we were starting out in 2021, it was still perhaps seen as China that might influence football going forward and football power and money.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia has been definitely the big mover in all sports. I think it was they hadn't even succeeded in buying Newcastle United when we started this. The other obviously big change, which we weren't expecting, was Donald Trump re-emerging as the US president, and what a big story he has been for sport, but particularly football. And obviously, he and Gianni Infantino were in Davos this week.
That friendship, of course, predates us as well. So that's the longevity of that. Trump-Infantino dates back to 2018. What a long and enduring relationship that's been. And how many stories that's produced.
And more of that relationship to discuss on this episode of Sport Unlocked. Something we started the whole of the pod discussing was whether or not there'd be a Super League. We often refer to how that was our very first Sport Unlocked. It was launched, it fell apart. Some of the figures like Nasser Al-Khelaifi emerged even more powerful. But we are seeing other sports. Now basketball maybe attempting its own version of a Super League. We have Eurobasket. Now in the last week, NBA Europe emerging as an even bigger threat now to Eurobasket with breakaway new clubs forming. Real Madrid, do they join the new NBA Europe? Perhaps some of this is just other sports like basketball trying to take on the dominance of football in Europe.
Yeah, it got a lot of press, this NBA Europe roadshow and this rival to Eurobasket, but there's still so little detail or a coherent business plan if any of this is going to work.
Familiar to the Football Super League.
Familiar to people who follow the Super League. And you mentioned this Super League, and we might talk about it a bit later on the pod, is that this is 5 years after we talked about Super League. We actually have a Super League, a football one, cross countries in Oceania. The Oceania Professional League has launched. So this is a league for teams from like New Zealand, Vanuatu, Fiji, etc. It might be the canary in the coal mine for what's to come in football.
And we have seen the new Champions League, the new Swiss format, which this season could see 6 of the 8 teams automatically going through to the last 16 being English teams.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something. Look, many people say this is sort of UEFA bringing in a kind of Super League by the back door. But it still does give lots of chances. There is a good spread, I think, of smaller teams as well in this 36-team format.
To Rob's point of the 6 English teams, though, is this, again, if we reflect on our half decade here, the money that the English teams are generating in excess of their rivals overseas. We were waiting for this moment when English teams potentially are able to pull away. And if you have so many teams in the Champions League, more than any other country, and then also qualifying for the knockout stages potentially from England, is this the moment when that money is brought to bear, spending more than anybody else in the transfer market, able to spend more in wages, and it's getting the results?
A good chance to reflect on then and now. And as we keep going, hopefully, on Sport Unlocked, as we've reached this half decade, and the person we've spoken about more than anyone else on Sport Unlocked, Gianni Infantino, this week, he was at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
You would think this is a ball, right? Well, that's not a ball. This is not a ball. This is a magic instrument that transforms people in happy people.
Quite a bit went on in Davos, a lot centered around Donald Trump, and FIFA president was there for the launch of the Board of Peace.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I think he will have been very relieved that Trump has pulled back on his Greenland threats, because lots of people were querying why FIFA had handed him this new specially created FIFA Peace Prize when he orders the military attack on Venezuela, and then he's threatening a military takeover of Greenland. And that, I mean, lots of European football figures concerned about that, didn't know what to do about it. I guess all were taking a wait and see. And at least Infantino is not going to have to face embarrassing questions now about what they're going to do when the USA sends the tanks into Greenland.
Well, he is facing embarrassing questions anyway. I think you're right. The Greenland thing would be, enormous. Absolutely, a major international incident in a way that we've not seen in recent times, particularly the US and Europe. But in the build up to that letter, he wrote a letter to the Norwegian leader around this issue, and he used the phrasing that he no longer felt obliged to, quote, think purely of peace, which is weird because it's a month after FIFA had honoured him as a man of peace with that trophy and with that FIFA Peace Prize. So I asked FIFA if it still believed he was the appropriate first recipient of the Peace Prize, and if so, why? And eventually I got a reply which said FIFA highlights the comments made during the presentation at the FIFA World Cup 2026 final draw, and a long supporting article which had that list, I think, Rob, of 8 wars that Donald Trump has claimed to have stopped in his time in office, which has been fact-checked quite a lot by a few different organizations. And also said, FIFA notes the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize recipient has presented her medal to President Trump. FIFA strongly supports its annual Peace Prize. However, the Nobel Organizing Committee says only the recipient is the correct owner or recipient of its Nobel Prize. So there you go.
FIFA not naming Maria Corina Machado in the statement, and I did wonder, did they recognise the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner? Is it Machado or is it the person who has the medal in a frame, Donald Trump?
Oh, I did follow up with them about that. They haven't replied at the time of broadcast.
So we're watching this peace signing ceremony, wondering actually if Gianni Infantino would be there at the top as part of the signatories. Apparently, countries had to guarantee $1 billion, at least for permanent membership of the Board of Peace. So it seems FIFA haven't offered maybe $1 billion, although they have committed funding to help rebuild Gaza. And so we're watching all the people who were appearing on the platform, wondering who are these leaders. And then suddenly I thought, that's a familiar face. That's Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, the Manchester City chairman.
Yeah, actually, as he was walking into the room or the building where it was all happening, and journalists were outside, there was somebody a journalist shouting at him, "Khaldoon, is Pep Guardiola going to be your manager? He's not having a very good season. Is this his last season?" Which I thought would have put things in context. Talking about world peace and someone shouting at him about Pep Guardiola, quite funny. He didn't respond, not surprisingly.
It's Faisal Islam from the BBC, who is a Manchester United fan.
He enjoyed asking that question. There was a long chuckle at the end of his question.
Well, he didn't ask him about the thing that was in existence before the pod started and is still ongoing now, the Man City case from the Premier League.
He could have asked Khaldoon that question. In terms of, you said Gianni has so far not a member of the board yet in the billion. However, he was sat in the front row when this group of signatories all lined up.
Of course, we live in a divided world, and of course we support peace. We have seen earlier this morning the Board of Peace with President Trump signing this agreement, this declaration. There is full support from FIFA to President Trump, to all the members of the Board of Peace, because we all have to support peace. We all have to unite, and we bring people together.
But the one thing that, again, puts him in an awkward spot for me is he's also aligned FIFA with the United Nations and a bunch of, UN groups. And if you follow the commentary around the Peace Prize, people have said this sort of sets this organization up, this Board of Peace, which will be led by one man, Donald Trump, who decides who joins it, up against the United Nations.
Permanently led.
Yeah, permanently led, and he'll get to choose who whenever the replacement comes in, who that will be. But again, it puts FIFA, this kind of multilateral organization, in a really odd spot again, doesn't it? Because of this relationship.
It does. Infantino also gave a fairly long presentation at this World Economic Forum in Davos, and made a bit of a joke, didn't he? Said, talking about how good the Qatar 22 World Cup was. He said it's the first time in history that no Brit was arrested, which I thought was not a bad joke, actually, but the Football Supporters Association in England didn't find it very funny and said, instead of making cheap jokes, why not concentrate on providing cheap tickets? Sense of humour failure, do you think, guys? Or?
Yeah, it wasn't that awful, but these days, everything's quite extreme, isn't it? So, is it the worst thing Gianni Infantino has done is it the worst thing he's done this week?
I think it's reflecting a perception that the criticism about things like World Cup tickets and hosting often comes from England, but it is, as we've often mentioned, it's the dominance of the English language that means that it can give the perception it's only English people, it's only the Brits complaining about something around the tournament.
The tickets are not cheap. We were hammered. I was hammered, I should say, because of the ticket prices, because they are so expensive. And the main critics were from Germany and England, of course. Now, number one in ticket requests is US, number two, Germany, number three, England. Because everyone wants to come and to participate. And now in the US, it is perfectly legal to resell tickets on resale platforms. And there is a law for that. So we have to, of course, allow that. So you can be sure that these tickets, for which we'll have to make a draw, I mean, every game will be sold out because we have 500 million ticket requests. Those tickets will probably be resold at even higher prices. And this is incredible, but it shows really the impact that it has.
I'm struggling with these numbers. We talked about it last week, so we don't need to labour on it. But he mentioned that 500 million number again and requests, etc., etc.
I think Infantino's point was broadly, if the World Cup's so bad as this perception apparently is from Britain, why are so many people requesting tickets from England?
Because people love football in spite of him, in spite of FIFA. This is like selling oxygen. They've got a monopoly on this thing that humanity loves. And what people are upset about is that he's behaving like a monopolist. He owns this thing and he's going to try and crank it up to the highest price, to the highest bidder. And that's what upsets a lot of people, because they really love this thing. And he is acting like a man who wants to sweat this asset for, as hard as he can. He spent more time in Davos than he did at his own FIFA Congress in Paraguay, last year.
Well, Gianni Infantino will be in England in the next week, we expect. FIFA have been in England in the last week. We've seen Arsene Wenger, others from FIFA, they're at the IFAB meeting. Next week, it's the first edition of the Women's Champions Cup. So this is a forerunner to the launch of the Women's Club World Cup, the big edition. This is the women's equivalent of the Intercontinental Cup as it now is in the men's game. So it's the continental champions who are going to be facing off against each other. Semi-finals at Brentford Stadium, then the final at the Emirates Stadium. Arsenal are involved as the reigning Champions League winners. And they're starting to announce where the sponsorship's coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I thought this was a literally sort of like jaw-dropping. I read it and I thought, what? Well, actually, somebody pointed out to me. I didn't see the actual announcement. But so Kinsica, which is the multi-club ownership group, run by Michel Kang, so owns Lyon in France, London City Lionesses, and Washington Spirit, have done a sponsorship partnership with FIFA for this tournament. Now, FIFA say it's just for this tournament. They're not. None of those teams are involved. But I mean, it's still a massive conflict of interest as far as I can make out.
FIFA still oversee the regulation of the game, things like transfers, and they can punish any team worldwide.
It has an ethics committee, for God's sake, the FIFA thing on top. Michel Kang is also on one of these new FIFA committees as well. It does feel a little bit strange. It'd be like, I don't know, FSG, the Liverpool owners, having a sponsorship with FIFA for a tournament that potentially their clubs could be in, maybe not this year, next year, and also governed, as you said, by those rules. Again, have you had a chance to ask anybody about this, or is it just another one of these things that disappear into a void?
Well, I mean, their sort of guidance is that they're confident there'll be no conflict of interest. None of the teams are involved in the tournament this year. But you're right, Michelle Kang. She's on the FIFA Women's Club Competitions Committee. So somebody on the Women's Club Competition Committee is running several clubs and is doing a sponsorship with FIFA. So, how can you visibly show that this isn't a conflict of interest when you have to deal with some of those issues that Rob mentioned?
Michelle Kang has shown a commitment to investing in women's football. She aligns with what you often think about, Tariq. She's keeping women's football separate from men's football, launching these women's only teams. The London City Lionesses not attached to a men's team. And so she's putting a lot of investment into the game at a time when it's needed. But if you check out a piece by Flo Lloyd-Hughes, she writes on thecutback.com, she pointed out, Kinska is certainly not a consumer-facing brand. It's an investment group. We are in this era where the sponsors of tournaments aren't things you can go out and just buy yourself as a consumer.
Yeah, maybe not the first time. If you look at, I don't know, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia and seeing its name plastered around stadiums and CONCACAF, another region that has a sponsorship with, that is certainly not a consumer-facing brand, is it? It's the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. So yeah, and Everton, funnily enough, they had a sponsorship with the USM Holdings, I think, the holding company for the Russian billionaire now sanctioned in Europe, Alisher Usmanov. He sponsored their training ground, I think, with his holding company. I don't know what benefit that would have for the holding company, but there you go. Yeah, interesting. Can I just change just a little gear here on this? It's coming to England, this tournament, and I dare say having it in England will mean there's going to be a decent crowd here, and both at Brentford and Arsenal for these games. And it just strikes me, when these governing bodies, when they really need England, they'll go to England. If they need some money, they'll have events in England. If they need eyeballs, they'll come to England. But whenever there is like a competitive, like big competition, England bidding for World Cups, and especially the Men's World Cup, they're often like criticised and overlooked. And that dichotomy I find really interesting, because it's almost like these governing bodies hate England a lot of the time, but then also really turn to it in their hour of need. And I always think, I wonder why the FA doesn't make more of a show of how much they help football when they need to.
With England being a developed football market, so sometimes the motivation of the tournaments is to grow the game in those countries, or it's about spreading competitions out around the world, because so much of football is dominated and centred on England. WSL, one of the biggest women's leagues in the world. The Premier League, absolutely almost like World Cup matches every weekend, given the global attention on them. And so many tours coming in for the matches as well.
Again, the WSL is interesting. It's through investment, both from the media and the Football Association and the sponsors. If there was more money piled in elsewhere, players would play elsewhere because it's a living. But again, it's England that has provided the basis for this. It's just something I find curious. England is a place, when football needs England, it comes to England. And then when it has an option, it kind of just like palms it to the side.
And FIFA arriving in England at a time that the WSL is complaining about the Women's Club World Cup, the scheduling of it in 2028. It's going to launch then. It's going to be probably just around the time the WSL would be coming off its winter break. And this week, they're saying it would be catastrophic, the impact on the WSL, if it is placed in, as it's planned, January 5 to January 30th, 2028.
Would it be catastrophic, do you think? I mean, we've had the World Cup in the middle of the Premier League season, other European season. I think it shows it's not catastrophic, but I mean, it's probably not helpful. But I think that's probably going a bit too far.
The women's game does benefit from international clashes, whether that's on the national teams and the clubs as well, we could see going forward. 2028 is a challenge. There's an Olympics in LA in the summer. There's a very limited window of opportunities when you could stage this tournament. So January is probably most likely. Qatar floated it is a logical place in terms of the climate. Giannis, football chief at FIFA this week, having to face questions about rights issues in Qatar. So if you do put it in January, you can never satisfy every league around the world when they're on their off season, when they're on break. Does the WSL continue, for instance, during the Club World Cup, or does it pause? Does it delay its winter break? If you have a longer delay and it's a sort of month-long winter break, then that creates maybe, let's say, player welfare issues. They're having to wind down, then train up to be fit again. Also, you lose that connection with some of the fans. So you might have a month and break that relationship between going to matches, and you need to keep the habit going. But you do have to adapt in some way.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, there is a bigger conversation about, again, we mentioned 5 years of this podcast, the international match calendar, be it for men's football or women's football. There has to be a coherent way of doing this. And equally, places in the world should all have the chance to host this and these events, whether it's hot or, whether climatically. So Arsene Wenger had suggested in the past that there should be 2 windows for international football, one in, I think it was like October and November, where a nation could host a World Cup, and then in the traditional dates of June and July. This is about getting people around the table, and I guess the right people around the table, rather than it just being imposed by FIFA. So you get people from the leagues, you get people from player unions, you get people from like club organisations and FIFA and the FAs, and you have a discussion rather than it just being just imposed.
It seems Arsenal will be in it, and potentially Chelsea as well. One option, this is just for England, is for that season you play the League Cup when the Club World Cup is on, just without the teams who are at the Club World Cup. You play it over a few weeks in a condensed period. You still offer some domestic football, and we have seen it already, the plans to no longer have Champions League clubs in the Women's League Cup anyway.
Necaxa. What's that a reference to? Anyone? Manchester United pulling out of the FA Cup all of those years ago to go and play in the Club World Cup in Brazil and getting their bums handed to them and coming home early.
Supposedly to help the England World Cup bid for 2006.
How did that go?
Exactly.
It was a 1-1 draw in Manchester United's opening game. However, a man in the news was sent off. Who is that man? A family man.
David Beckham was sent off.
David Beckham, yes. Sent off in the 43rd minute for a high challenge on Jose Millan. A quiz question.
That's managed to get the Beckham reference in of the week.
But I think there's an argument for, and they've looked at it, I think, also for the Men's League Cup, is if you're in the Champions League and not also being involved in the League Cup. But I think in the men's competition, I think that felt it would devalue it too much.
Also, we might need to prepare for longer matches because VAR's remit is expanding. This might not have been noticed amidst all the football during the week, but Martyn and myself, we were at one of the annual IFAB meetings held near Heathrow this week, and in quite a low-key way, a decade after the first trials of VAR were approved, the remit is expanding. So it's going to be used in new areas. Many have called for this, but it's got to be ratified still next month. But from the World Cup, we are going to see second yellow cards reviewed by VAR, amongst other changes.
And the other one is VAR is going to have the power to look at corner kicks to make sure that the ball came off the defender rather than the attacker. So the IFAB is this strange body made up of FIFA and the 4 British associations, a bit anachronistic, you could say. But it's about a year ago, there was a sort of, if you spoke to some of the delegates on there, they said, oh, no, we don't want any more VAR powers. FIFA basically decided they did want them. They don't want the World Cup to happen where, for example, in the final, where a wrongly awarded corner leads to a crucial goal, or somebody sent off and it's a mistaken second yellow card, changes the game, and they end up looking embarrassed. So they've been putting the pressure on, and it just shows how these things work. Actually, they've succeeded. And for the World Cup, we will have corner kicks and second yellow cards being overseen by VARs.
I was speaking to Noel Mooney. He's the Football Association of Wales Chief Executive. Wales are this year's chairs of IFAB, and he is insistent that referees are being told to be very quick, only act on factually inaccurate issues, and to basically make the decision in a way that does avoid slowing the tempo of the game. Or they know fans are frustrated with how long matches have become, over 100 minutes, but it's very subjective still. And it's subjective in terms of how long a referee takes to deliberate over these decisions. And the fact there's now even more areas that VAR is going to look at, I don't think fans might realise fully until the World Cup begins why it's intervening a lot more, even if there is, and there's always been, a logic that a red card can be reviewed. But if you get a second yellow card and you dismiss, that couldn't be reviewed. That was completely logical.
I suppose there's a logic. And the corner thing, guys, for me, it's this time and the break in the game. I have maintained my, I guess, frustration and opposition, I guess, to VAR. I don't think it really has made the enjoyment of the game better. Controversy still is a big part of the game. When it goes, the decisions being taken. Has it made football better? What you guys might think it has. I really, really do struggle with it. And now adding even more elements like the corner, I just think this is going to frustrate people even more. Again, Rob, engagement, social media, more commentary. Is that good?
Created talking points. We thought it might cut refereeing discussions. It's certainly done none of that. But we often think of football leaders being out of touch, but the complete sense from being at the IFAB meeting is they know fans are irritated by these delays. So it's why they're working on quicker substitutions, quicker corners, quicker goal kicks, and ways to speed up the game.
Yeah, looking now, having countdowns. Referee gives a 5-second countdown if he thinks a player's wasting time taking a throw in or a goal kick. And the one thing they say about corner kicks is, especially with the chip in the ball, the microchip in the ball, which the FIFA has for the World Cup, actually it'll be almost instantaneous to be able to do. The AI will let you know who the ball came off. So even before the big centre half have trundled up to for the corner to be taken, that decision should be known. Let's see what happens in practice.
Well, we've rarely had a delay in a match in a final like the one we saw in the Africa Cup of Nations final between Morocco and Senegal. Over 15 minutes, the final was paused as Senegal players were ordered off the pitch into the dressing room in protest of that penalty being awarded in injury time. The fallout has continued from that game. Morocco missing the penalty, Senegal eventually winning it in extra time. Morocco protesting, saying they'd launched legal action against the Confederation of African Football and FIFA. It did lead to what was quite a rare public rebuke of a country and a team by Gianni Infantino.
Yes, but again, you have to look at bigger football politics. Where is FIFA's African outpost?
Rabat.
Which organisation is going to host the 2030 World Cup?
Morocco, jointly with 5 others.
Yeah. Gianni Infantino has a very close relationship to the Moroccan Football Association.
And the Crown Prince.
Yeah, it is rare. But also, I think he's right too as well. I mean, what happened in that final was incredible, a number of levels. So you had the potential walk-off, or the walk-off, the actual walk-off of the Senegalese team before they came back. You had the crowd trouble. As a result of this, you had the refereeing controversy throughout the tournament as well. You also had this bizarre situation where the reserve goalkeeper of Senegal had to stand next to the goal of his team was defending to stop Moroccan subs and ball boys effectively stealing the towel of the Moroccan keeper, Edouard Mendy. Like, there was a lot of mad stuff going on there that deserved a review, and Senegal were the victims of some of this stuff, starting the day before, where they put an official complaint in about their training facilities, the hotel being mobbed by local people when they arrived. It shouldn't be like this for a major competition where one team is actually very uncomfortable. So there's quite a lot to unpack there, isn't there?
And the need probably for some sort of punishment, because it is generally one of those situations where a bad example could be set from the very top of the game to the bottom of the game, because if it's shown you can walk off the pitch and potentially unsettle the opponent for 15 minutes before returning and then they go and miss the penalty, well, anyone could do that at any level of the game without being over dramatic, down to park pitches, junior football, anywhere. And it's why that message from Gianni Infantino was very important, and perhaps it might have been one more impactful to repeat and spread across the week rather than the Davos conversations, when he was saying that teams must compete on the pitch and within the laws of the game, because anything less puts the very essence of football at risk. And he was talking about respecting the referees. I mean, that should have been the mission through the week. It was never said on camera, never said visually, only in the written Insta post.
I mean, part of me thinks he's got some sympathy for Senegal because I think they'd been the victims of just two of the worst refereeing mistakes I've seen in a major final. A really, really bad one to rule out the goal, and then a second to award a penalty against them
within a minute.
Yeah, so you know, if you're that team, you think this is ridiculous, and especially with everything else that had been going on. You think that basically everything is being sort of, even the authorities are sort of going, deliberately going against you. So I've got a bit of sympathy for them, but yeah, but I also know what you mean, Rob, about you can't just walk off the pitch. I think, but I suppose what other power do you have? You don't. Do you just grin and bear it, or do you actually show your displeasure in a very, very dramatic and meaningful way?
And it was probably well handled ultimately by the refereeing team, waiting it out, letting the final complete, rather than the potential chaos we'd be talking about if they'd abandoned the match and the protest that would have led to not being able to complete it.
Well, you might be the first person who's commended the refereeing team for their performance at the final. So, a first on sport. Yeah, and it did finish, and obviously, Brahim Diaz, who ultimately missed the penalty, that level of pressure there in front of, a very, very partisan home crowd. Morocco hadn't won for 50 years. They'd spent hundreds of millions on stadiums and billions on stadiums and infrastructure to host this event, and it was all designed for them to win. But then again, that's football as well, to be honest. That this uncertainty of result, which is, again, what keeps us watching these things.
And it was a wonder strike that settled the final in the end from Pat Gay for Senegal. One overriding thought, some people saying it's a bad advert for African football based on this one match, whereas this seems to be a successful dry run for Morocco for the World Cup. A lot of people welcoming the infrastructure, the trains, the facilities around, the new stadiums as well, that up until the final, this was not an AFCON of chaos and logistical problems.
Is it possible that two things can be true at once? Yes, all of this happened, but that final in the biggest game of African football, the one I dare say that the global audience, the rubberneckers outside of Africa, the one they tuned in for, were watching. And I must say, it kind of created its own kind of entertainment and storylines as a result of all of this. But as an advert for African football, it's probably not a good one. And people are saying, it's kind of a very colonialist approach to commentary around it, that it's a bad advert. But if it is the biggest game, then yes, it is a bad advert. Like the final of Euro 2020 was a bad advert for English football.
But not European football.
Not European.
Called it here's a bad image for the whole of European football. Is very much about England.
It was English. Was the violence at Wembley and the behaviour of English or some English supporters that day. But that was very specific. It was supporter behaviours to this team. But this was an organisational element as well around and the refereeing and everything else that came with it. That's why. So you can kind of see it from both perspectives. The tournament was great. Stadiums were great. People who went there had a good time. And it was reasonably priced, people said.
We have been very football focused, maybe like often on Sport Unlocked, but we like to mention some of those big other headlines from other parts of sport and from the world of motorsport. A $12 million award in McLaren's favour in their legal battle with a former driver.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating court case, this. Alex Palou, Spanish driver, multiple IndyCar champion, signed for McLaren 3 years ago. But then the move fell apart. He claimed that their promises about when he was going to become their Formula One lead driver weren't fulfilled. And so he quit, went back to Chip Ganassi Racing, the IndyCar company. McLaren sued him for $30 million. So partial success. They lost on their claim for Formula One losses, but have won $12 million compensation for the rest of it. So, this has also been a very interesting court case, this, because it all focused on McLaren basically using disappearing WhatsApp messages. So lots of stuff which would have been evidence in the court was not made available because the messages had been erased.
I'd never heard of this guy. Tells you there's sums of money in Formula One. You know, it's such a high-profile sport. I might say a lot about me and my lack of maybe interest in it, but this guy was he on the payroll and had been paid? Did he have to give money back, or is he just never shown up for work?
He had signed a contract. I don't think he'd actually given any money, had been paid any money, because he hadn't started. Unless maybe there was a sort of signing on fee, effectively, that he had to give back. But the rest of it was for basically losses from what they claimed they would have got had he joined them, as he had agreed to do. So, for example, he's won the IndyCar with his other team for the last 3 years. And so I suppose the argument is if he had kept his contract, they could have earned that prize money, sponsorship money, etc., from him being there, which they're now missing out on.
Palau had claimed that the number was vastly inflated and there was an attempt to take him to the cleaners while he had admitted breaching the contract. But huge judgment just shows how long these things take to do, 100 plus pages just to justify the reasons for this payout. Well, us three were on Sport Unlocked right at the start. We're still here now. One of the things that has changed, apart from all the videos you now get now, the music. We did have a slightly different tune at the start. I can't remember which of you created it now.
It was me. Well, I didn't create it. I put it into some sort of website, and it came up with this. I think I typed in Sport Unlocked and said put that to music on this, and that's what it came up with. That's the only that's not the only claim to fame, but it wasn't very good.
Well, I think we should have another listen. Does it still exist, Rob?
I've just found it. I did go and find some freely available music, so it's mentioned every week in the description, but thank you to MusicbyAden and No Love. That's the tune that we use.
Well, if there's a
Excellent.
concert coming up, guys, fancy an away day.
Well, they might want to send a tune into the FA.
Yeah. The FA wants to have its own FA Cup anthem, like the Champions League one for UEFA or Formula One have had their anthem since 2018, which they would make available to broadcasters, and they would play during the handshakes, a bit like the Champions League one, which they say basically they want to basically cash in on the sort of sonic branding, they call it, guys.
If only they had an anthem already, something that was associated musically with the FA Cup they could use. Something like Abide With Me that's been played at the final since 1927. I think they're overthinking this. One thing they could do is just create a reworking of it for the earlier rounds, a sampling of Abide With Me.
Maybe they will. Maybe they will, Rob. That's not a bad idea. You might. Hold on, get your invoice in now.
Another one. So what we got? We'll add it to the Harris list. 24-hour Olympics, Peace Prize, FA anthem with Abide With Me, to dance music.
But let's finish on sport's most famous anthem, Sport Unlocked. Great to do the 5 years.
Brilliant. Here's to the next 5.
Thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye for now.